Retirement is just the option to work or not work.
You don't have to do everything.
There is a hard fine line between enabling and actually helping your kids.
If I had to sum up what Gen Xers are feeling, it's stretched.
My mother's getting too old to live independently, so exploring options for having her move into an assisted living facility.
My son is still living at home. He's 25. No real end in sight there. How can I plan my finances so I can take care of my family and still retire on time?
What should we do if my mother does not have enough to cover a high quality facility? I'm almost 60.
The sandwich generation is tough. There are a lot of people that are trying to support their parents and also have kids still financially dependent on them.
I think the feeling from Gen X clients is, number one, that they're more reliant on their own investments, right? They're more reliant on their own 401ks, their own savings, versus having those pension income streams or maybe that higher level of Social Security than what they're expecting. But they're also feeling pressured in other ways. Maybe it's real estate, right? We know that interest rates are high. It's really hard to be buying and selling homes. A lot of Gen Xers already own their home and maybe they're in a house that has a low interest rate and that's great. But what if they have to move, and they're at a phase in life where they have younger children or children getting ready for college. And at the same time, they have parents that are in their 70s and 80s and are aging and may need more and more help from them. So they're really the sandwich generation of people.
The frame in which I want you to take a look at this is that I am the son in this. So my financial plan is the son. Everything else is just revolving around it, rather than let me go here and solve this, let me go here and solve this, and then I come back and solve it for myself. Because as noble as that may be, I have a lot of clients who will say, well, Rose, I love my job. I don't mind working until 70. By the time I'm 70, my mom or dad will not be alive. By the time I'm 70, my child will be 35 and hopefully out on their own. And then they just keep delaying their own. What you're not factoring in this is that for many people, retirement is not a choice. It's something that they have to do, whether they are laid off from work or there's unfortunately a certain illness that comes into play that is forcing you to retire.
I ask those hard questions, is what will you do if by supporting mom you can't retire at 60? You have to work until 70. If you use this much of your own money, then are you okay working until 70? Are there other solutions that could potentially work? Are there solutions where your mom could sell her house and have those resources for assisted living or things like that? So I think it's just taking a really honest look at your own situation and asking those what if questions is, well, what would you do if you couldn't retire because you helped your parents?
You don't have to do everything. You can leverage the resources that you have as well. Mom has some resources. Leverage those resources and then leverage other resources that may be available to mom as well when she is at a time where she doesn't have enough to cover all of her expenses. You just don't have to do it all. There's some real tools you can use in financial planning to make sure that when you start searching for that facility, her assets are enough not only to cover her in the short term, but in the long term as well. So in the question, you've mentioned high quality facility, right? If that facility is super expensive and you know what's in the bucket of money for your mom, maybe that's not where we start. Maybe we start somewhere where you can fund her end of life and not have to either stop working earlier and derail yourself or using your own assets to do that.
I have a client that just took out a HELOC so that they could build an apartment above their garage for her mother to live in, just for her mother to pass away 6 months later. And they now have to pay off that debt. I have clients that sell their parents' house to afford assisted living. I have clients that have parents move in with them, but that's not necessarily the answer for everybody. I mean, some people wouldn't stay married if their in-laws moved in with them. So you have to really take an honest look at your family dynamics and their situation and see what could potentially work. If your mother runs out of money, that's where Medicaid can kick in, but you have to use everything before Medicaid can kick in.
I'm assuming that maybe there's no long-term care insurance involved. And we know that in many cases, long-term care insurance is really prohibitively expensive and it's very hard for people to qualify for. We still believe that having long-term care insurance is something that you need to look at. So in your 60s or earlier, you need to look at whether or not long-term care insurance is going to be affordable for you and whether or not it's something that you can qualify for. Because paying for the insurance, if you end up needing long-term care at some point in your life, it'll likely be a lot less to pay for that insurance than it will be to pay out of pocket to go into a long-term care facility. I have a lot of stories that I could tell about, kind of bad situations where people waited until the last minute to make a decision about, going into long-term care, or they really said, I really want to stay in my house. I know I'm pushing it because I have stairs and, my knees are bad, or I fell once. The reality is that it's not in the cards for everyone to age in place in their home. Unless your home is really, really one level and, a bathroom with wide doors, and you have really invested in making this home a place where you can age there safely, I think a lot of people end up having to go into long-term care in some way, shape, or form, or living with their children and having their children take care of them. So it's a reality for a lot of people. You'd be aware of all that, make sure you do your research, but know also what's available to them before you start draining your own retirement account to pay for them and putting yourself in exactly the same situation that your parent is in right now.
If there needs to be some financial support for them, to what extent are you able to cover? Are your siblings able to help? Let's bake this into a family conversation, because that's going to be another cost. Similar how in retirement I bake in fun stuff. I may have to bake in family support. For that 25-year-old, it may be having that tough love conversation, going, how do we show them that they're not going to be on the books forever, and then really find that fine line of a aging parent and a haven't left the nest person without impacting your wealth. Maybe working slightly longer and baking that into a mindset that maybe it's you retire part-time at 65 and you work a little bit longer may help offset those costs to make it where it's a plausible plan without feeling like you're never going to retire.
I don't know the gender of the person, but most likely a woman. We tend to be the community helpers, the carrier of burdens when it comes to, who's where and what are they doing. And I just want to give you permission and say, you don't have to figure it all out for everybody. And that includes your 25-year-old son, right? You don't have to figure it all out for them. You don't have to put your goals on the side to make sure that, a young adult is okay. So that's one. I don't want to make assumptions because I do have a 13-year-old who's of special needs. So you may be in this case, in which case, absolutely, that should be included in your overall financial plan to make sure that child is okay. And it should have been included since you began your financial planning journey.
There is a hard fine line between enabling and actually helping your kids, and I see too often people enable. I have a client that has a 44-year-old son where he owns the house that this 44-year-old lives in, and that son was paying a family mortgage payment just to then go back to dad and ask for money for help. So the mortgage payment got turned off 2 years ago and is never turned back on. But is that actually helpful? No. I mean, he needs to learn how to budget and pay his bills and pay a mortgage. And yes, it's cheaper for him to pay a family mortgage than it is rent somewhere, but he still needs to be paying that family mortgage. So it's so hard. There's such a fine line between enabling and helping.
By setting them up early with little easy things where it's the easy methodology of paying yourself first, some fixed percentage of your pay, teaching them how to use a credit card effectively without running up debt, building cash reserves are really easy foundational things that you can help them start to navigate that world. And I'm a big fan of not waiting till you're past to your kids to inherit your wealth, because if they need it now, gifting them a little bit without them feeling like it's a handout is another good strategy if it fits into your own financial plan.
Determine what exactly you want to provide to them based on your own financial plan. If it's you always have a room here, or I will pay for your car insurance, or I'll pay for your phone bill, but that's it, then that's it. That's all you pay for. And at that time, it is up to them to make the adjustment necessary to get all these other things that they want.
The joke is, if they're not financially sufficient now, you may end up on their couch later. So that's the tough love on even, I'll work with our kids to go, let's figure out your cash reserves, your debt, your 401k, because in my experience, helping that child on a path to financial independence from their parents, I may say the exact same thing as their parents. But because it's coming from me, not their parent, it has a little more credibility, and I'm happy to be the bad guy in the situation, where it's Jason's fault. Jason's saying this. I'll own that because that's my next generation of client.
Let's face it, that's reality right now. It's hard for a 25-year-old to have enough money to be out on their own and independent completely without some support from their parents. And at the same time, it's very expensive for an elderly person, somebody in their 70s or 80s, to be able to afford long-term care without long-term care insurance, or to be able to live on their own. What I would remind this individual of is that the most important thing that you can do for yourself and for your family is make sure that you are shored up financially. And so what I mean by that is make sure that you have your debt squared away, that you have your cash reserves squared away, that you have your retirement plan laid out, and that you're saving enough for all of those things first. You have to put yourself first in this situation. If I had to sum up what Gen Xers are feeling, it's stretched thin.
For decades, I feel like we Gen Xers have been told that Social Security will run out before we would be able to retire.
So I haven't factored it into my retirement planning, but it looks like that may not be really the case.
I'm still over 10 years away from retiring, but will Social Security still be there? Should I factor it into my plans?
In terms of Social Security, let's provide some context, right? In many circumstances, it is the primary source of income for Americans. You have the ability to start taking Social Security as soon as age 62. You can delay all the way to age 70 or take it any time in between. The longer you delay, the bigger the check you're going to get. So you're incentivized to delay. The way the system works right now is we have many people in the workforce that are paying Social Security taxes every time they get paid. Those taxes actually go directly to the retirees that are collecting an income right now. When we talk about Social Security potentially having a shortfall, again, anyone's guess is as good as mine, but let's say 10 years from now, what's happening is we're seeing more and more baby boomers retiring. And so they are collecting the taxes from the existing workforce. And eventually, there's not going to be enough from the paychecks that the current workforce is paying in. And so that's when they have to dip into this Social Security trust fund. There's this piggy bank that essentially takes care of the shortfall. Well, we're concerned that that piggy bank, that trust fund for Social Security, is going to eventually run dry.
Social Security will be there, just maybe not entirely. Right now, tax revenue coming in can pay about 75% of the benefits. So they're using a trust fund to pay the rest of that. And that trust fund will run out in about 10 years. So for clients that are 10 years out, I tell them, yes, factor it into your planning, but take that number down by 25%. We don't want to count on it in full. And then if it is there, if there are changes to Social Security to keep it funded, then you're better off. But don't count on it in full, just because there does have to be some changes to Social Security to keep it funded.
Because if you look at the prior generation, their full retirement age was 65. And then they moved it to 66 and change, and now it's 67. So it may not be at 67 as your actual full retirement age, it may be 67 and a half or 68. So what I try to do in a planning perspective is, let's talk about discounting it. What if you only get 80% or 75%, and then that way we have a lower assumptive future income. And if I get it wrong, it's because you got more money than we thought, and no one has ever complained about having too much in retirement.
I think it's wise to still keep Social Security as a component of your financial plan, but not to be dependent on that as a primary source of income. We've shifted. The Gen Xers were really the first generation to not have pensions anymore. You know, the older generations typically had pensions, had income streams they could rely on. Now, some people still have those, whether or not you're government or military, or you work for a municipality or maybe a school system. There are still pensions, but not for most people. So it's really on us to now create those for ourselves. So it may mean that you have to do a little bit more in terms of your planning around building up your assets, building up your 401k, IRAs, etc., to be on the safe side. Because what you don't want to do is be planning for 100% Social Security to be coming to you in 20 years, and then to find out that you either have to wait a lot longer to get it than you thought you were going to have to, or it's going to be less than what you expected.
So I always tell clients to focus on what they can control if they have anxiety about whether or not Social Security is going to be here. I always tell young folks to not count on it. I mean, Social Security is not in my own financial plan, because then if it is there, then we have more money in retirement than less. So for anybody under the age of 50, for the most part, I'm taking those estimates down, and then anyone under the age of 40, we tell them not to count on it.
It is hard to start. It is hard to see what the next 5, 10, 15, sometimes 30 years looks. So I try to do that kind of the small bite-sized pieces to going, when you're building wealth, for most people, the first 10 years, your accounts are really not growing that much. It feels like it's not doing anything. But the beauty about compounding is eventually it starts to take off like a rocket ship. So I try to show clients the power of compounding early, to not feel as though they're never going to retire. And what I love how about these conversations, especially with younger clients, is you have so many years to change the plan. It's going to be very fluid. That's going to be part of our ongoing conversation, that as your world changes, as society changes, as things change, that's why it's paramount that we talk on a regular basis. So you can tell me what has changed, and I can tell you it didn't really impact your long-term goal.
And this is why we have to make some decisions as to how we're going to replenish that piggy bank. How do we replenish the trust fund? Do we increase taxes? Do we delay when people can start taking benefits? There are some tough decisions that need to be made, and somebody needs to come together, really Congress, both sides, because this affects everybody. Regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it affects everybody.
It's all about control, right? Retirement is just the option to work or not work. And so trying to help people see how big little changes make in their lives, giving them back control, and really cash reserves, maintaining debt, thinking about education planning, and really giving them a laid out plan. Because in my experience, a lot of people have so many moving pieces going in their head, they never see it written out and see the steps, right? So if there's 10 things, they focus on all 10 instead of just the one. Don't focus on everything, focus on one thing. Let's accomplish this one little baby win, then we can move on to the next ones. And I found that gives people a lot more control in their plan.
I don't know how and what way the changes will manifest, and nobody does at this point, but I think it would be smart to plan for the worst and hope for the best.